Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Chloe Melas and Elizabeth Murphy wrote the introduction to Luck of the Draw, My Story of the Air War in Europe, which was written by Frank Murphy. Frank is Chloe's grandfather and Elizabeth's father. Chloe, who I interviewed for this podcast about her grandfather's book, is an entertainment reporter for CNN, covering breaking news, industry analyses, and in-depth investigations. She currently resides in the New York area with her husband and two sons. Actually, Chloe is who interviewed me for CNN Book Club and who also interviewed Alicia Fernandez-Miranda about my What If year. Her mother, Elizabeth Murphy, holds a Master's of English Literature from Northern Arizona University and is the author of numerous children's books. She currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia, where she was born and raised. You'll hear their story, you'll hear about their grandfather, and you'll hear about this important book, which was just profiled in People magazine. Today we have a special episode with two lovely ladies who are the co-creators and issuers forward of Frank Murphy's book, Luck of the Draw, his daughter, Elizabeth Murphy, and his granddaughter, Chloe Melas, both here on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Very exciting.
I am so excited to be here with you. This is like such an unbelievable opportunity. So thank you so much, Zibby. Seriously.
Oh my gosh, of course. And Chloe, you've been nice enough to have me on CNN and the whole online feature and the book club feature. And it was so wild and fun to go in studio with you that day. And anyway, that was a highlight of my life. So thank you.
You were a natural. Honestly, that was such a fun interview. And obviously talking about your book, which really has been touched so many lives. You've really just inspired so many people. And that's what I hope we're going to do with my grandpa's book. I'm telling you, I'm not an author here, but I feel like I'm what it must be like to be you, Zibby, for a moment, to like shepherd a book and try to promote a book and get a book happen. I have so much admiration for authors after this process, this multi-year process.
Oh my gosh. Well, so Luck of the Draw is My Story of the Air War in Europe by Frank Murphy, your grandfather and your father. It is unbelievable. So much information, emotion, source material. It's just an incredible look into one man's sort of unbelievably inspiring journey, how he survived falling from an airplane, landing in a German family's backyard, essentially with his parachute, surviving prisoner of war times. But also he talks about even how he got there and the lead up to it and how it was so different then from what the Air Force is now and the level of training. I mean, he was literally just a student at Emory going about his everyday life. And I think about what the students today are like and imagining if like all of a sudden we were depending on like juniors at Emory to save the world. I mean, it's like crazy. So anyway, talk about how his journey to writing this came about and you're ushering it into the world and just all of it.
Mom, that is such a you thing to answer because you're really the reason why Grandpa ever decided to put pen to paper.
Well, as I wrote in my foreword, my dad rarely spoke about his World War II experiences as we were growing up. We just had a notebook my mother had put together with a lot of memorabilia and grainy photographs. And so once in a while, he would talk about parachuting from a burning plane and his injuries. And it wasn't till, again, I was around 11 or 12, I saw the movie The Great Escape, and he told us he had been at the same prison camp when we were fascinated. And again, he never gave much details. But years later, I was beginning my writing career. I was writing for children, and I had gotten my first book contract with a publisher in Atlanta. And my dad was very excited. And he came to me and said he wanted to write a book just for the family, a memoir. And I had no idea it was going to focus on the war. And I said, it's a great idea. And so as I recount, I bought him a book, How to Write Your Own Life Story, for his birthday. And he set about writing his book. And it took a number of years to write. And during this period, I published my first book. We moved to Dallas, Texas for 7 years. And this was back in the snail mail days. Dad would often send me the manila envelopes, portions of the book about different bombing raids and so forth, and have me read them. And at some point, as he got involved with the World War II reunions veterans groups, he came upon a small publisher that told him they would publish the book. And Dad decided to give all the profits to the Mighty Eighth Museum in Pooler, Georgia. And then the book got published, and he sent us all copies. And I remember when I first read it, the children were too young to read it. Chloe and Stefan were very young. But I remember when I read it, I was astonished. I didn't know any of this, his wartime experiences, what he had been through. And it really felt like a movie, and we were so proud. And the fact that it went full circle, because he went even a step further by going over to Germany, tracking down the farmhouse, meeting the family, the little child that come running up to him when he parachuted. He's a grown man by then. And he started correspondence with this family. He couldn't speak the language. He would write letters in Atlanta and use a German translator. And, they went back and forth for years. So it was, obviously very cathartic. And he enjoyed so much talking about it when he would go to to these reunions. So now Chloe's story is different, because I guess by the time she was growing up, little did I know he was regaling her and my nephew with his little wartime stories. And Chloe can tell you about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, so Zibby, so it really starts with this idea, my mom basically giving kind of like how to write your own life story for dummies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really?
And my grandfather, it turns out, as I've done this family tree search and quest, and now I do 23andMe and all this kind of stuff. I'm so interested in my family's history. It turns out there were other journalists and writers and people who work for newspapers in our family. So I think it sort of runs in our blood a little bit, this storytelling. But I remember as a little girl being in the basement, my grandfather was retired. He was writing on a typewriter. Then he moved to a word processor, then a computer. And this published right when I was in college. I didn't read it immediately, but it was around that time that I started developing this interest in World War II. I was learning about it in high school, learning about it more in college and some of my history courses. And when my grandfather was diagnosed with cancer, really shortly after this book came out, I decided to go to England, to the Air Force Base where he flew out of. And so that was sort of the beginning of a 15 plus year for me, learning about my grandfather and what he went through. So when I found out that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg were going to be telling my grandfather's story in Masters of the Air for Apple TV that comes out this fall, I just knew that this book needed to be really published, not self-published, published for people to be able to get, because it's been out of print essentially since the moment it came out. So that is where that comes in. But let me tell you, I did not know what was in store for me. I thought I was going to be okay, here's the book. Here you go. Just reprint it, make more copies.
Yeah.
No, that is not what happened. No. This has been a lot.
So it's essentially it's coming out new, as if it hadn't been ever released. I mean, when you acquire a book like this, and the publisher, who is publishing it? St. Martin's.
St. Martin's, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like acquiring a new book and all the marketing and everything related to it. And it almost,
Well, I mean, the craziest part is, Zibby, is they were like, all right, so can you send us the Word document or wherever he wrote this? I'm like, it's basically was written on a scroll. Okay. They had to digitize the book, which by the way is sort of we all sort of like looked at each other, and it's not something that's done often. Then they're like, okay, great. We'll get the book digitized. It's going to take a minute. Can you give us the photos that are in the book? There's like 100 something photos. I'm like, okay, grandma. Hey, grandma, do you know where these photos are? She's like, what are you talking about? I had to fly down to Atlanta for a weekend and dig through the basement, through the storage unit, through boxes. And I'm not joking. It was like something out of a movie. All of a sudden, the sun came in through the window, landed on this box in my grandmother's guest room, not even in the places I was looking. And it said, photos for the book. It was like in the place my grandfather had left it back right in 2006, 2007, before he died. All the pictures were there. So then I was like, these are original photographs from the 40s, you know, from World War II. So I was like, how do I take them with me on an airplane? Do I scan them? Do I mail them? These are original copies. So I was like carrying them through the Atlanta Hartsfield Airport as if it was, you know, the Queen's royal jewels. Right. I was so terrified. But look, here we are, and it's been wild. And then it was, how do I get support? What do I do? And so I'm telling you, there's a whole other story about one of the worst days I've had. And I got an email from Tom Hanks with a quote for the book to use for the cover. And I cried and cried. It was the most insanely amazing moment because I had gone through this process, gotten St. Martin's on board. My agents with CNN helped me make this happen at CAA. And, you know, then to then have that support.
Yeah, I remember I was overseas when Chloe got the quote, and she sent it to me, and it says at the top, and he has this very innocuous email. I didn't.
Don't say the email. Don't say Tom Hanks's email.
And she says, "Don't share this with anyone." And I wrote the quote, and I thought, well, "What's this from?" You know. And then we talked to each other, and we both had a good cry because we couldn't believe it wasn't just that Tom Hanks gave a quote; it's what he said.
Let me read it here. The quote is, "In the pursuit of authenticity, of accurate history, and undeniable courage, no words matter more than I was there. Read Luck of the Draw and the Life of Frank Murphy and ponder this. How did those boys do such things?" Tom Hanks.
Just sounds like Tom Hanks, yeah. So we were so excited. And yeah. Well, you know, did you tell the story about Tom calling grandma?
No, but let me just say that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, from Schindler's List to Band of Brothers, The Pacific, they have tirelessly spent such a large portion of their professional careers telling the stories from World War II. And they've always wanted to tell, Zibby, the story of the air war, but they want to do it right. And they don't want to rely on just CGI. They literally rebuilt World War II and the air war, rebuilt planes from scratch, built their own B-17s. It's one of the most expensive TV shows ever made. It was going to be on HBO like the others, but this is going to be Apple TV, which is so exciting. I went to the set during the pandemic, which, mind you, I almost missed the opportunity. They were almost going to be done filming, but because of all the COVID restrictions, remember when you had to quarantine in Europe for 2 weeks when you got there before you could go out? And I couldn't leave my 2 little kids for that long. And as a mom, I'm sure you get that. I was like, I'm not going to get to go. And they lifted it. And literally I was on a plane, I think 48 hours later with 10 of my family. I was like, by the way, I'm not coming alone. Can I bring my aunts, my uncles, my cousin, my brother, my husband? And we went to the set and it was wild. Tom wasn't there, but now I've developed a relationship with the guy playing my grandfather, Jonas Moore. He's actually the narrator, the voice of the audiobook for Luck of the Draw too, which is awesome.
Wow. How did Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks find the story? Did they find the old copy of the book? Did you send it to them? How did that happen?
Okay, so this is really interesting. So when my grandfather self-published his book with a local publisher called F&P at the time, it was like a food and nutrition publisher, and he had been in the 8th Air Force, and he had developed a really wonderful friendship with my grandfather. So they had published it and only put out a certain amount of copies, but my grandfather started speaking at these different World War II reunion groups, the museum in Savannah, and the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, which now I'm on the board of. So that's like also super full circle. And I wish I could tell my grandfather that, like, look at me now. Like, I would have expected that I'd be, talking about World War II and becoming this like expert in a way on your life. So it got circulated, the copies that were out there, among people who were just diehard 100th Bomb Group, Bloody Hundreth fans, supporters, family members. And when Tom Hanks and Spielberg decided with Hanks's production company Playtone, Spielberg's production company Amblin, that they were going to tell Masters of the Air, which is a book written by Don Miller. He's a historian who wrote this New York Times bestselling book. They optioned his book. My grandfather is quoted in that book. My grandfather knew Don Miller. My grandfather wrote his book shortly after, or around the same time that Don's book came out. Somehow it got into the hands of Playtone. Still to this day, I joke with the people at Playtone, we don't really know how they stumbled across it, but the writers, specifically John Orloff, who wrote Band of Brothers, who's famous and wrote now Masters of the Air, the screenplay, he started going to these 100th Bomb Group Foundation events. And guess who was there too? Me. And I'd be sitting next to him and I'd pull up a chair and I'm like, I know I work for CNN, but don't worry, I'm not here as a journalist. I'm here as a granddaughter. And we would chat. And I'm not saying I had anything to do with getting it on the radar, but I did interview
Yes, you did.
Tom Hanks. I did interview Steven Spielberg about other projects. And I may or may not have brought my grandfather's book, like the last copies, with me and physically handed it to them. They had already known about my grandfather's story, but it was a really magical moment when Kirk Sadusky at Playtone said, and I did not bring it up for years. I never asked if Grandpa was going to be in it. I'm just happy that they're telling the stories of the 100th Bomb Group, which is a specific unit that my grandfather was in, known as the Bloody Hundreth. It's like one of folklore and, heroes. And so Austin Butler is going to be the star of this TV show. And when they told me, yeah, your grandfather's in it, he's a character. I mean, I was hoping that they would say that, but I never wanted to ask because that's not my purpose of being friends with these people. I'm just excited to amplify. I'd be amplifying Masters of the Air, whether or not my grandfather is in it, But yeah, it is just such a wild thing. And that I'm an entertainment correspondent, the fact that this all gets to sort of intersect as the shooting star moment in my life in this one moment. And I loved my grandfather so much. I just want to say he was the nicest, most soft-spoken, sweetest person. He did everything for the family. He always helped anybody, whether it was the worst moment of their life or the best moment of their life. My grandfather always supported. And so it's such a joy for me to be able to use my platform and do whatever I can to tell his story because he deserves it. And he worked for almost a decade on the book. So I want it to be seen,
This is such a crazy story. The whole thing. It's amazing. And now the fact that the book is out, and by the way, he's a great writer. It's not just like, it does not feel like somebody just doing it yourself in your closet, like type of writing. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is actually like a really great history. It's like a James Bradley, is that his name? I don't know, like all these war reporters and correspondents, and it's so vivid and visual and you're like in it. And then there's all the source material, but it's his story and the way he tells it with this like slight remove, and analysis, but also the deep feel, at what it was like being there. It's really amazing. It's amazing. It's like, of course you want to do everything you can to shout it from the rooftops. It's so special. For people who don't know as much about why it is the Bloody Hundredth or why this group was so special and why there even is a TV show, can you give like the quick synopsis of who this group is and why it's so important in history?
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, just a bunch of just barely 18 right in college or just, barely out of high school guys, enlisting in the war, and you weren't really able, you could try to join the Air Force, you could try to be a pilot, but it really came down to your, abilities. My grandfather wanted to fly, loved airplanes his whole life. And it was called the 8th Air Force. The 8th Air Force still exists today. And within the 8th Air Force are different squadrons, okay? And then different bomb groups. And you're just thrown into one, like the title of the book, Luck of the Draw. My grandfather was in the 100th Bomb Group. They all flew out of England, out of Thorpe Abbotts Air Force Base, or most of them flew out of that area. And that's where my grandfather flew out of for, his many, many missions. And this group got a nickname called the Bloody Hundreth, and no one really knows why. Some say it's because the Bloody Hundreth had the most casualties. Others say that the Germans specifically targeted the 100th because of sort of like the rules of engagement, that the 100th didn't abide by the rules of engagement up in the sky, and that a German fighter pilot put their landing gear down, allegedly, which means, don't fire at me. And supposedly a 100th plane fired at them. And then allegedly the Germans then targeted this specific group. But out of this group were so many amazing stories. And Don Miller, writing Masters of the Air and focusing on the 100th like he did, Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg then were like, that's the story we want to tell. We want to tell the stories of the 100th. And there are all of these amazing stories you're going to hear about. Dan Rosenthal's father, Rosie Rosenthal, who's very famous now. All of these men are dead. My grandfather's story will be told. Harry Crosby's story will be told. I have his book right behind me, A Wing and a Prayer. That was also used for the series. My grandfather's book, Luck of the Draw, was source material for John Orloff in writing the series. My grandfather's book's really interesting because, like you said, Zibby, there's not a lot of these stories out there from personal firsthand accounts. Like Don Miller, it's incredible. Like I said, New York Times bestselling book, but he wasn't there. And my grandfather was, and he talks at length about being a prisoner of war for almost 2 years. Yes, they're in the same prison camp where the Great Escape happened. Okay, the Great Escape was the British side, but my grandfather separated by just barbed wire, a death march in the snow. I have the shoe behind me right up there, one of the shoes that he used for his march.
And you said he switched shoes with a soldier and got a clog. And now here is the clog. This is insane. Hold on, I'm taking a screenshot of this as we're talking. Okay. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, so it's just incredible. And so long and short is these men, they come back from World War II and they get back to their lives. My grandfather finished his time at Emory University, met my grandmother. They popped out 4 children. My mom, the second oldest. And then my grandfather had this spectacular job as a lawyer for Lockheed Martin, back working with airplanes, selling planes for the Saudi royal family. And he lived in Saudi Arabia for really a majority of the end of his career. And yeah, like you said, my grandfather happens to be a great writer. And I mean, I always knew he was brilliant and had a way with words. But that's the other thing. It's not just that, oh, it's my grandfather and I'm biased and I love my grandfather. I'm not saying my grandfather's story is anything more exciting than anybody else's grandfather's story, but it's just the fact that he wrote it all down and it's there. And there's not many of these stories out there. And this is a historical, sacred account. And we can look back on this and learn from it too. And yeah, these guys, they had barely any experience, any training. And the scariest and saddest part is that they did these daylight bombing raids. They literally went up in the sky. They're not bombing like bin Laden in the middle of the night. Not that I'm belittling that. I'm talking like they're flying right now, 1819 morning, as soon as the sun goes up, and they're a target in the sky right there for the Germans. But we decided, the US, that the way that we could accurately do precision bombing would be these daylight bombing raids. But that means you're going to lose a lot of people. And so my grandfather talks about that, being in these airplanes. I've been in a B-17 from World War II. It's like a tin can. It's so loud. It's freezing, by the way. And my grandfather was the navigator. He was like what GPS is now. He's there with a map trying to stay calm, focused. And it's because he's so calm and so brilliant that he was able to map out these targets and get people where they needed to go. But I'm telling you, people out there that think like, well, I'm not that interested in World War II or history. I want to read, my crime books or curl up with my love stories. I'm telling you, this really is a page turner. It's really good. And you're going to learn something too. And that's why I'm so passionate about telling it. And Zibby, I can't thank you enough for using your platform to shine a light on this. I know how much you love your family and your dad and just how much you care about legacy. And I know that you just get it. And I really appreciate that.
I do get it. I do think it's amazing. It is so special, a project. And I have so much respect for the two of you for all your efforts in making sure that this story gets out there, because it's one thing to write it and it's another to make sure people read it. So all of your efforts and the collaboration with the show is so exciting. Anyway, it's just amazing.
I was saying closing, my father often lamented at the end of his life how much he wished the book could have been picked up by a big publisher.
Aww.
This was really his fondest wish. I don't think he even knew it went out of print. I didn't know until I went to visit the museum and they'd never heard of the book when I went into the Mighty Museum in Savannah. So,
Well, they'll know it. They will know it now.
His wish. Yeah, they're going to know it now. This was this was my bucket list.
Aww. Well, congratulations. Actually, my step-grandfather was a rabbi in the Air Force. He was like a rabbi in the medic.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe they cross paths. I'm sure not. But anyway,
maybe.
Who knows? Thank you both for coming on. Chloe, I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. I would love to hear more about your journey of getting this book out in the world and all the backstory, even more. Congratulations. Luck of the draw. My story of the air war in Europe. Frank Murphy. Really amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zibby.
Thank you. Okay. Bye, ladies.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.